It was the 5th year. The 5th freaking year. Every summer since I moved into this place, I've always made an attempt to grow a garden. The thoughts of picking fresh vegetables out of my own yard brought me back to my childhood. In my opinion, they always taste better grown that way. On top of that, it seemed like every single person in the neighborhood had their own lush garden. I could go down a list of reasons why I wanted to grow one. For whatever reason I might use, I believe the work needed to prepare the soil, plant the seeds, and tend to water and weed was well worth it. I want to make this known so you'll understand my frustration when I tell you that I've not harvested a single vegetable from my garden. I do everything right. All the plants are in the perfect place for sunlight. I always make sure they have enough water. What doesn't make any sense is that the plants themselves grow just fine. They grow tall and healthy, showing their beautiful green colors to the neighborhood. I've switched it up plenty of times through the years. I've tried to grow corn, cucumbers, zucchini, radishes, tomatoes, peppers of every kind you can imagine. None of them bore a single thing the whole time they grew. This was the one thing I wanted, ever since I could even contemplate the possibility of owning my own house. I had dreams of growing my very own garden. Well, I finally snapped. It was Halloween. Summer was over, and the weather was turning sour by the day. I had just gotten home from a long day at work. Sitting on my porch was a bowl of Kit Kats for the early trick-or-treaters. Enjoying the sunset as I read a book, I began to think about the failures in my garden. I was becoming stressed out and frustrated at the mere thought of it. I set my book down and went into my garden to get a shovel, angrily marching over to my dying garden. If you're not going to grow me anything, I might as well dig you up and start over, I thought. The thought came over me as I plunged the shovel into the dirt. I almost said it out loud, as if the garden could hear me or something. I put more emotion behind each thrust, putting in more momentum and driving my foot with all the force I could muster, digging deeper as I went. As I kept going, I lost myself in anger, but after a few minutes of this, I realized I couldn't believe I was taking out my anger on my garden. It was only a garden. I slowed down. I was about to stop before my shovel hit something solid. I heard a thump of impact. It wasn't a rock. I jabbed the shovel twice more and heard the same thump-thump both times. Interested, I dug around and scooped out some dirt with my hand, ripping apart networks of small roots to reveal a wooden plank. It didn't appear to be on its own, more like part of a large structure, a box or something. My emotional state turned from anger to excitement. Maybe I hadn't been able to grow a garden in the yard, but I might have just found someone's hidden treasure. I dug even faster in my excited state. Now that my anger was gone, I flung dirt all over, not even remaining attentive enough to keep nice, neat piles. I furiously worked to uncover the surface of the box and found its edges. The thought about what could be inside rattled around in my mind. The worst part was cutting through all the roots to get to the thing. I had a hard time pulling most of them out with my hands, having to use the shovel to chop at them first. Then I took a step back, getting the whole picture. I immediately noticed its shape. It was that of a casket. It was an old one, or at least a makeshift wooden one. I stared at it in disbelief. This house wasn't that old. Why would there be a casket in the yard? It didn't seem possible at the moment. I shrugged the shape off as just being an odd one. I chopped at the roots that crawled around the edges, finishing them off. Reaching down slowly, I gripped the side of the casket and flipped it open. A set of empty eye sockets looked back at me, though what remained of the casket was far from a skeleton. Beside the skull, the rest of the naked body still had plenty of flesh remaining. Too much flesh. The corpse had the musculature of a bodybuilder, more definition than I'd ever seen on a living person. Its organs were visible, barely contained by the muscle tissue around them. Everything about the supposed corpse, besides the head, looked like it was still alive, but the shape of the bone structure seemed inhuman. Its veins were shown clearly through the entire body, and it lacked skin. Each one was connected to roots that crawled around its entire body, roots that filled the rest of the space in the coffin. I knelt just to get a closer look, but I started to hear something. I leaned in further, almost touching this grotesque corpse. I stopped my breathing to listen. The rhythmic beat of a heart filled my ears. I gasped, jerking myself up and stepping back. I felt my own heart beat faster and faster as it rose in my chest, and I found myself breathing rapidly in fright. I ran inside and grabbed the phone, my fingers dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? I found a casket with a body in it in my yard, but there's something wrong with it. I proceeded to give the operator my location, and she assured me that the police weren't en route, only minutes away. After the call ended, I ran outside again to my freshly dug up garden. I was stopped dead in my tracks. My eyes felt like they were about to burst from my skull as I looked before me to see the casket with no corpse. All that remained were the roots, still mended by the body they had been strung across, surrounding what was now only space in an empty casket. It was gone. I looked up, my eyes darting around, spinning my head in all directions. A chill crawled up my spine, and I tensed up as I searched for the corpse. It was nowhere to be seen. The cops pulled up to my house a few minutes later, and 2 officers stepped out of their vehicle. I saw them but paid little attention, still scanning around. You the one who called it in? Well, yeah, I did, but it's not here. When you called, you said there was a dead body, correct? I did, yeah, but it's not here. See? I pointed to the hole in my garden. The officers approached, but stopped at the edge, both leaning in to get a peek. They displayed confused expressions. The other officer, who had yet to say anything, let out a single chuckle, as if he found this ridiculous, before shaking his head and turning the other way. The other sighed and looked towards me. Are you aware it's illegal to abuse the use of 911? I don't abuse anything, sir. There was a body here just a few minutes ago. I don't know. You don't know what? What happened to it? You thought it would be cute to set up a little casket, Halloween decoration style, and report a dead body to us. You dig it up now to make a little display just for us? No, well, yeah, I just dug it up, but This made me think of something. I looked back at the hole, realizing my shovel was nowhere to be seen. Something hit my back. Felt like a droplet of water from a sprinkler. A scream followed from one of the officers. Turning back, I made eye contact with the cold, dead eyes of the first officer and the tip of the shovel that ran through the head, splitting it apart. The shovel was ripped from the back of his skull, and his body fell, head landing at my feet. I was now once again looking at the empty eye sockets of the corpse that had been under my garden. I turned towards the other officer who had drawn his gun. The sound of the first shot shocked me so much, I fell to the ground. The officer popped off bullet after bullet as he retreated to his car, each one connecting with the muscles on the body. The corpse didn't so much twitch in reaction. It kept its slow, steady pace, walking towards the officer. The officer paused, taking a moment to make a well-placed shot. It grazed the top of the corpse's skull and took a chunk with it. This seemed to anger it. In one swift, lightning-quick motion, it raised the shovel and threw it like a javelin, gliding through the officer before bursting through the windshield of the patrol car, pinning him to it. While this happened, I had enough time to draw the gun out of the other officer's holster. By the time I had it, I looked up to see the empty eye sockets of the corpse looking back at me. I booked it to my front door, but by my account, it didn't have any interest in a chase. As soon as I was inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it, grabbing my phone and heading for the kitchen, which had the back door to the house. I dialed 911 again, checking the chamber for a round while the phone rang. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I just called a little while ago. Your officers were just murdered right before my eyes. The thing that killed them is outside my house right now. It killed them with a shovel. With a shovel! I screamed into the phone as I kept the gun raised in the direction of the entryway. You need backup. Lots and lots of backup. Please, get here soon. It's... A boom echoed through the house. I trembled at the sudden noise, raising the gun in my shaking hands that held it. The front door creaked open, and footsteps followed. They only took a few steps inside before they stopped. It's been a long, long time. It could talk. I didn't expect that. I tried to reason with it. What do you want? It seemed to ignore me. All this time, dreaming of this day, the day I would rise and feast on the world once again. Oh, it feels good. I don't want to go back. I began to shake even harder, looking over at my back door, ready to make a run for it any second. Of course, I have you to thank for all this. I looked back to see the corpse staring at me from across the hall. I just needed the fuel, and if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have gotten it. You feeding me all those years, preparing me for this day. Oh, come on, boy. Haven't you always wanted your own little garden? Here I am. The flesh that bound the bottom jaw to the top retracted back. It was smiling at me. I felt dazed, like I was about to throw up. It turned its head back to the front door. Sirens began to approach from the distance. It could tell. It knew they were coming. I took the opportunity, swinging the door open and sprinting through the backyard and the first row of trees that separated me from the neighbors. I ran faster than I could think. Through backyard after backyard, I sprinted. Gunfire erupted from behind me, but I kept going. It sounded as if a war had broken out, and a battle was taking place in my neighborhood. Soon I emerged into the next street, but I kept running. I forgot all about the handgun I was holding. A kid in a Jedi costume noticed, dropping his plastic lightsaber and plastic pumpkin full of candy, screaming as he ran away from me. The dozen or so other kids and some of the adults who accompanied them on the street noticed it too. They screamed and ran as well. I thought about saying something, but I didn't bother. Being scared and on the move was probably for their own good. They didn't know what was behind me. A man emerged from a house in front of me with a shotgun and aimed it at my head. Stop right there. I did as he said, aware of the situation that I seemed to have created. I raised my right hand with the gun above my head and did the same with my left, showing him my empty palm. Listen, something's coming. I didn't shoot anyone, I swear. We gotta get out of here, or stop it, or... What in the hell are you doing, waving a gun around, scaring all these kids out trick-or-treating? Drop the gun right now. Not wanting to get a face full of buckshot in the street, I dropped the handgun and kept my hands raised. The man turned back inside his house, and I could faintly hear him tell somebody to call the police. He turned back towards me, adjusting his aim. Something caught his attention, and he looked slightly to the left before something collided with his face and knocked him to the ground. It exploded on impact and spewed an orange substance everywhere. It was a pumpkin. I looked to my right to see the corpse walking towards me. It was bleeding profusely and had many obvious holes ripped in its tissue and an even larger chunk torn out of its skull. In one hand it held a jack-o'-lantern. With the other, it pointed at me. I'm not finished with you yet. It yelled to me. I glanced down. The gun was only a leaping distance away. It seemed like my only choice. I dove, but something hit me before I could make it. It threw the other pumpkin. It fell apart when it hit me, pieces of its shell flying around. I fell on my back and began to gasp for air. It had knocked the wind out of me, and I could tell at least a few ribs had been broken. I felt achy all over my body. It even hurt my neck, and I turned to look at the corpse as it approached me. A gunshot rang through the air, and the corpse stumbled back. It recovered and rose, only to be shot again, this time tripping and falling to the ground. I flipped myself over and began to push myself from the ground. It took 2 attempts to get myself up. I looked up to see a woman on the porch, holding the shotgun the man had been aiming at me. I then looked back down and locked eyes on the handgun. I picked it up as I stumbled back to my feet. I was still shaking and in pain, It limited my ability to hold the sight straight, and I knew I couldn't be very accurate, but I wasn't far from my target. I shot rapidly, some bullets making contact, some just hitting the ground. Behind me, the woman continued to blast the corpse with the shotgun. I was empty, and with her last shell, she shattered the skull to pieces. Its black brains spattered out and painted the pavement. The corpse wasn't moving anymore. I retreated to the porch of the house next to the one with the woman holding the shotgun, keeping my empty gun trained on the now lifeless corpse. More sirens were approaching. After a few minutes, I sat on the stairs and lowered my gun, setting it on the step beside me. I dearly hoped it was finally over. An armored police truck pulled up onto the street we were on, and followed by a caravan of all sorts of emergency vehicles. Ambulances, fire trucks, and even police from some of the other towns around ours. Some stopped on our street, some moved onto my street. The police that stepped out of the armored truck were equipped with heavy body armor and rifles. They surrounded the corpse in the street. The woman on the porch screamed for the paramedics. A few of them ran to her and her husband lying on the ground. I heard the woman cry out in relief and thank them over and over again when one of them said that her husband was going to be all right. I got up and limped my way over to them. I talked with the paramedics for a while and let them know how injured I was. "You're going to have to wait. There are others with more life-threatening injuries, and we need to attend to them." I didn't respond, except for nodding my head. I overheard someone else in the crowd, at first responders, say, "We got 7 dead officers and a dozen dead civilians, with twice that many injured. We don't know how the hell this happened." Hearing this, I lowered myself to the curb, sitting down gently to not hurt myself worse. I watched the woman walk with the paramedics as they carried her husband on a stretcher into the ambulance. She waited outside as they shut the door. She watched the ambulance leave before taking a seat next to me on the curb. I tried to muster something to say, failing horribly. I wanted to apologize to her for what had happened to her husband, but I didn't know what to say. Sorry I dug up that monster in my yard. I didn't think anyone, including myself, was ready to process that. Looking at the side of their house, I opted for a different topic of conversation. "That's a lovely garden you have." She laughed, looking over at it like I was. She paused for a moment and let out a sigh. "Yeah, it might look lovely, but I don't know what's wrong with it. Ever since we moved into this place, the plants we grow have never given us anything. We haven't gotten a single vegetable. Must be something in the dirt." Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you enjoyed tonight's story and you haven't already, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. While you're here, maybe go ahead and give that video a like and drop a comment. I like it when people comment. If you're not too spooked and you think you might can handle a little more, why not go ahead and click on one of those other videos that's about to pop up. Maybe check out one of our playlists. There's quite a few. If you'd like to support the channel more monetarily, I'd suggest maybe you go pick up a copy of my latest book. There's a link below. Or maybe head on over to Patreon. I have quite a few tiers. I'm sure there's one that'll suit you best. Speaking of Patreon, let's go ahead and thank our patrons, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. And thanks to Winters, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Martha, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you're a fan of my books, I always recommend go ahead and join that Ghostly Reader tier. $10 a month, and it also gets you a book anytime I write one, which is around twice a year usually. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.